series of tutorials. In this session, Christopher will give you a brief introduction to encoding performance text, dramatic texts, plays, that sort of text in TEI XML. Go ahead, Christopher.
Great, thanks, Gabby. Okay, so for this session, I want to give you the basic structures that you need for encoding performance texts. Now, performance texts are tricky because there are all kinds of printing conventions that were invented over many centuries to represent what are essentially fluid performances. So that means that you see quite a variety of structures in performance text themselves. So the TEI tries to handle most of those, but as we'll see in a moment, sometimes there's some uncertainty about how to represent these texts and what to do with certain elements that are unclear. So at any rate, I wanted to introduce the dramatic text by John Milton, a masque presented at Ludlow Castle, otherwise known as Comus. And the reason why I like this text is that it has some of these uncertainties that I just alluded to, but it's also a good way of introducing a mixture of poetry style encoding with dramatic encoding. But this is also a masque, which is its own kind of dramatic text, an interesting one that was specific to 16th and 17th century European drama, and it was mostly a courtly entertainment that involved presenting works in preparation for a ball in which aristocrats would play out these texts and engage in songs and dances while wearing masks before having a lavish ball. So it's a very particular kind of genre. And as I said, it mixes a variety of textual elements. So what I'm showing here is an e-text from the John Milton Reading Room at Dartmouth, which gives us the original, text from the 1645 edition of Milton's poems, which we'll be copying and encoding in Oxygen. So now if I go into Oxygen, I've already encoded this text here, and we'll upload this to our GitHub site for your own reference. But over here in this tab, I've just copied the text without any encoding so that we can run through this text together. One note though, before I begin, just to remind you, if you recall from a previous tutorial on the introduction to TEI, I spoke about the need for constraint and the role of customizations and a modular approach to TEI encoding. Now, in this case, you can accomplish that fairly simply by selecting this new document icon. And if you're starting here from the top, you scroll down to the TEI P5 folder of templates, and you can see here that there's a drama encoding template that you can create. And that gives you a blank template that looks similar to other TEI P5 templates, except you'll notice here in the XML model namespace, TEI drama.rng, and that just means that you're dealing with a customization that is specific to drama, which means that you're limited to only using the drama tags in the TEI when you get down to encoding this text. Right, so now how do we get down to it? Well, the TEI header I've already filled out, and this is fairly basic information, a title that I just took from the John Milton Reading Room. There's nothing particularly interesting to point out for our purposes, so just consult this file, as I said, in our GitHub site when you have a moment. Now, what I'd like to focus on for this session is what goes in the text element. Because I've pasted in here the some selections from the masque into the body element within the text element. And what we need to do then is to build structure around these different textual elements. So the first thing we get with this masque is a list of cast members who are performing in this drama. So immediately we've got this issue here of the persons, the attendant spirit afterwards, and the habit of Thyrsis, and then the list of the characters following the attendant spirit. So the first thing we want to do is put a div around this list of characters. And I'm going to put a type attribute on this and indicate that this is a dramatis personae. And now we need to make some additional distinctions. So for example, the persons is just the heading. So I'll give that a head element. And then what I want to do is I want to group the cast members who are represented in this play. And that leads to a cast list. And you'll see that we've still got some red underlining here. And you can see that we're getting some instruction that the cast list is incomplete. And the reason why is that we need cast item elements to further distinguish who is a part of this cast list. So from here, we can just add cast items and more cast items. And I'm just going to flip back here to copy this over to make life a little bit easier for ourselves. And then I will explain what I've done here because it's important to identify that there's a new element that I've added to the cast item, and that's the role element. Now, the reason for this is that sometimes in a cast list, you'll see a combination of the name of the role and the actor. So because in this particular cast list, we're just getting the roles, you might not need this role element, you'd think. But just to be as specific as we can, I want to indicate the role here. And I'm also going to give it an XML ID. And we'll see in a moment why that's important. And as we've said before, once you name an XML ID, you can then refer back to that ID elsewhere in the document when that name is referred to. But supposing there was an actor listed who was playing Comus. There isn't in this case, but suppose there was. We could then add an actor element and, Benedict Cumberbatch was playing Comus. You would put that, and you could even add an XML ID, and you would have that. That is not the case for this particular text, so we'll get rid of that. But now we've built a cast list. And this is a pretty standard feature that you'll find in a lot of performance texts. So we're getting somewhere. But now we come upon something really interesting and that I'd like to spend just a few moments on because it is an uncertainty about how to deal with this particular text. It says the chief persons which presented were, and then there are three names, the Lord Brackley, Mr. Thomas Egerton, his brother, Lady Alice Egerton. What this is saying is that well, first of all, we know that Comus was performed for these people and featuring these people, whether they were in the audience or whether they were acting, not totally certain. They probably did do some acting in some of these roles. I'm not a Milton expert, so I can't say I know. And maybe someone who is expert can tell me exactly what the situation was. But because I don't know, I'm not going to worry too much at the moment about what each of these people is actually doing in relation to this cast list. So in effect, this is kind of a separate cast list, you might think. But what's really important to emphasize is that because this is a mask, and because these names here highlighted were essential to the performance of the mask, we're going to use a performance tag. We're going to wrap this information in a performance tag, and then further distinguish just within a paragraph here that the chief persons which presented were, and just for the sake of doing things in the most expansive way possible, I'm just going to put each of these names in a name element. Now, if I knew exactly what roles they were playing, I would want to cross-refer to one of these cast list items. But in this case, I don't know, so I'm just going to keep it open, as it were. So what we've got here is a list of the people who are, well, of the roles in the play, and then we've got this performance element, which is meant to give us information about the particular performance in the text, but we still have this red underlining, and it says it's not allowed here. And one of the reasons for that is that typically this kind of information is included in a front element. So I'm going to wrap all of this in a front element as part of the front matter. And I need to move the body tag. Okay, so now that's all good. And now that we've got this information in the front matter, namely the cast list and some information about the performance, somewhat sorted, now we can move on to the actual play text itself. And typically within performance text, you want to distinguish using div tags, the acts and the scenes. So usually a div 1 is an act, and then a div 2 nested within it is the scene. So each scene will be in its own div 2, which is a child of the div 1 tag. In this case, we don't have a division of acts. We just have scenes, which is indicated here by this header that says the first scene discovers a wildwood. So I'm just going to wrap our text in a div 1 for now. And I'm going to give it a scene type and n equals 1 for scene 1. And here I'm going to start by treating this as a head element. The first scene discovers a wild wood. And at this point, you're starting to notice probably that this is starting to look like a normal text. And here we've got a poem that starts the mask, a line group. So this would just be standard poetry encoding. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to copy that over from the finished file. And one thing you should also notice here is that in brackets, we have line numbers, and in the encoded text, I've put the line numbers in n attributes within the L's, so within specific lines. So what we've got here is a head element followed by a poem, and each line of the line group is featured here, and some have line numbers. And that's all we need to do for this particular section to start with. But now let's just have a moment and look at the importance of individual speeches in performance text. That's usually the core content of a performance text. So here is a set of speeches in a dialogue format between Comus and the lady. And all we need to do here, and this is again using Command or Control E to surround this line of text with an element. We're going to surround the entire speech with an SP element. stands for speech. I'm going to hit space. And I'm going to go down to who and look at this. Because I defined those XML IDs within role tags, I now have my list of character names that I can select and cross-refer to. So I know that Comus is speech using this speech. So I'm going to select Comus here. And within that speech, there's a speaker, which is represented by CO dot. So Command E again, and now I select the speaker element. And then within that speech element, we also have a line of text, which we'll just use, for which we'll just use an L element, because this is generally lines of poetry. And similarly here, again, speech element, who, lady, and here's the speaker, and here's a line, fairly basic at this point. And here are the other two lines, which I'll copy over. And again, I'm also adding these line numbers. Now, the final thing I want to show you is about stage directions. Another common feature of performance text. And here what we've got is an interesting scenario where we've got a speech by the elderly brother with a stage direction in the middle of the speech, as it were. So what we're going to do is highlight this whole speech here, surround that in a speech element, who, brother one, bro one, elder brother, and the speaker here is elder bro. And here we can surround this speech in an LG element for line group, and each of these lines will be tagged thus. And when we get to the stage element, we'll then nest within the line group a stage element. Now, what's cool about the stage element in TEI is that there are specific types of stage elements that you can then refer to, or stage attributes, including stage business, stage delivery, stage entrance, stage exit, stage location, mixed modifier, all kinds of novelistic. I'm going with setting because this just describes the setting of this particular stage direction. There are other kinds of stage settings that I'll mention in a moment. And then from here, we just finish the L encoding and add the line number as before. And that completes that speech. And then here you just have some more speeches by the spirit, the elder brother, the younger brother. And again, I can just refer you here to the completed version. We can copy that over to save time. And we just need to complete that. And we have a green square, so we have some valid TEI. But there's one more thing I just want to show you on this, on the subject of stage elements. At the beginning of this text, you'll notice that we started out with this, this header at the beginning of the scene. And I want to modify that just a little bit. So I still think that the first scene discovers a wild wood could be properly encoded as a heading, but the attendant spirit descends or enters is properly a stage direction. So we'll encode that also as a stage element. And then I will add a type again, except in this time, instead of using setting as I did before, we'll give this a type attribute of entrance because it is about a spirit entering. So now we have some performance encoding. We have valid TEI, and these are pretty much the most basic structural and semantic features that you'll find in most performance texts. There are many others that come into play, but for the most part, you're using speech elements and embedding within those speech elements various core features of the TEI, whether it's poetry encoding or prose encoding. But for more information, of course, you should consult Chapter 7 of the TEI guidelines for more information. So that's it for that demo. Gabby, did you want to ask any questions?
Thanks, Christopher. Yeah, that's great. Could you put your oxygen back up again, please, for a second?
Yep.
Yeah. There. So yeah, that's a really useful introduction. That's taught me a lot of things, actually. I'm not an expert in encoding drama by any means, so these questions are surely things that you will make short work of. But I had a question about the. So I got three small questions, just questions about decisions you made in encoding. The first one was the very last thing you talked about was that stage direction, just after the head. Which is just a little bit down from here, isn't it? What if that stage direction was also the head? That stage direction, it's in bold, it's centered, it's right there at the top of the page.
Yeah.
But it's also clearly. Can you nest stage inside head?
I believe you can. So let's try that. I think you're right. Yeah.
You can. Okay, great.
Yeah. I mean, in most cases, and as you saw, I nested stage in an LG, which shows you how flexible that element is. It has many content types. So yes, that could happen.
Yeah. I remember seeing some things in TEI occasionally where you have to make a decision that something is either one or another when that's not how the logic of texts work. So I was just wondering if that was going to be the case. Okay, that's good. Thank you. The next question I had was a bit further up in your performance set. You tagged your second name there, Mr. Thomas Edgerton, his brother. Is his brother technically part of his name? And is there some other way we could tag it if not?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I think that it's referring to Lord Brackley. So Egerton, I believe, is his brother. So yeah, I mean, you could. I mean, if you wanted to make this a little more interesting, you could give Lord Brackley an XML ID, and then you could use a referring string. Let's see if that even works. To Lord Brackley.
Yeah.
So that would probably be one way to do that.
And that could be either inside the name tag or outside the name tag, depending on your preference. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Great. Yeah, actually, you're right. It would probably be best to move the name tag to be more specific there. Yes.
It just occurred to me that there are some sort of relationship tags like that. By tags, I mean in text, not in XML tags, that are part of someone's name. So, if you said, Alexander, son of Philip, to use a non-17th century example, son of Philip is part of Alexander's name, right? That's how it works.
Right.
But Sir Thomas Edgerton, brother of Lord Brackley, is not part of his name in any sense. So
right.
Yeah, some people might want to tag it in a different way.
Yeah, for sure.
My third question then is almost certainly just a question of asking you why you did a certain thing. So this is down on line 70 where you had your first speech, or any of your speeches would work. Why is it speech with the attribute who as opposed to speaker with the attribute who?
That's a great question. I don't know. That's just what I've been told to do. That's just the convention in TEI.
This is TEI convention, not just your preference.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I first learned TEI, I wondered the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is the whole speech is being spoken by one person by definition, and it's better to identify the whole content of the speech rather than just the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, the speaker plus the speech comes from the same entity, right? So that's why you use the who attribute within the speech element. It's encompassing everything.
Not necessarily everything in the speech is going to be the things that Comus do, as you saw with these, as you showed us with the example of the stage.
No, that's true. That's true.
Someone else's stage direction.
That's
not the
true.
person who's speaking. So I guess if you wanted to disambiguate the speaker, the correct way to do that would be with a ref or something, right? To point to the speaker, say this speaker and this is who he is, whereas who means who is doing it. It's a speech and this is who is doing the speech. Comus is not doing the speaker, Comus is doing the speech. So
that's right.
That makes sense.
That's a great question though. It's an interesting issue about what elements are encompassing and what they represent. And it's not always obvious.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for thinking that through with us. That's great.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. I think